In the past half hour, the Home Office has won a legal challenge against its policy of sending some asylum seekers to Rwanda. Migrant charities and some of the people affected by the scheme had brought the claim, arguing the government had no right to fly people to the African nation. It's expected the ruling will be appealed. A judge has also ordered the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, to re-examine a number of individual cases. Let's speak to our Home Affairs correspondent, Dominic Casciani. Dominic, welcome to you. Just explain this ruling to us and what it means.
Samantha, this ruling is absolutely huge for the government. I mean, it is, you cannot underestimate how important it is for the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and her predecessor, Priti Patel, and for the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to have won today at the High Court, because winning today actually, in theory, in their words, in their minds, makes it easier for this policy to ultimately come about. Now, I've got to be frank, we're going to have layers of appeals after today, possibly all the way to the Supreme Court, which could take some time. But the fact is, the High Court today, two judges, including one appeal court judge, have said that the government does have the legal powers to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Now, we haven't had time to go through this absolutely mammoth judgment in depth, but what I can tell you is about how this case effectively played out back in September when it was fully reviewed. In essence, what the claimants were saying, they were a mixture of individual migrants who'd arrived on small boats from France, plus a number of NGOs and charities. They'd argued that the Home Secretary didn't actually have the power to send anyone to Rwanda to have their asylum claims dealt with there. And secondly, even if she did have that power, choosing that particular country had been an irrational thing to do because, in the words of the UN Refugee Agency, it didn't have the capacity or the safeguards in place to ensure that any migrants sent under this controversial scheme could be properly cared for and their cases could be processed. What the High Court has said today is the contrary to that. It said that the Home Secretary does indeed have the power to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. So in essence, if people basically come to the UK in small boats, seek asylum, as things currently stand under this High Court ruling, the Home Secretary can say, well, you could be basically relocated to Rwanda and have your case dealt with there by Rwanda. And if you're found to have a genuine case to be a refugee, Rwanda will give you settlement or look after you, and we will help to pay for that. Now, that is a really important victory. However, at the same time, just to slightly complicate matters, the 8 individuals involved in this case, individual migrants on the small boats, each of them has won the right to have their case reassessed because the court said, in effect, their cases had not been properly considered by the Home Secretary's officials. That means that those individual cases go back into the system to be reconsidered for a possible removal flight to Rwanda at some date to be fixed in the future. But in essence, the game is on for the Home Secretary and the Home Office. They have basically got control of this, and in theory, they could start making moves now to say, well, we want to resume this. It's all subject to whether it goes to the Court of Appeal in January.
Yeah, and so if that happens, lots of ifs and buts here, but what do we know about time frame at this point, Dominic?
Well, it's very difficult to say, Samantha. Let's just go back to the beginnings of this. It was last April when the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said we're going to start sending some asylum seekers to Rwanda to have their cases dealt with there. And the cohort there was basically people arriving on small boats from France. That led to a proposed removals flight, which basically had a jet on the runway ready to take people to Rwanda in June. That flight was stopped after effectively an extraordinary legal battle all the way to the European Court of Human Rights over a number of days to basically put injunctions in place. And the European Court and Strasbourg has said, hang on a second, nobody should be removed to Rwanda until the High Court has actually ruled on the lawfulness of the whole scheme. So we're now at that stage where the High Court has ruled that the scheme is lawful, but appeals can take time. Now, the two judges in court today, they've told the parties to come back on the 16th of January for a fuller hearing as to whether they wish to appeal. It's pretty certain that the losing parties, the NGOs, the charities, they will seek to appeal this. We don't know whether the government will seek to appeal losing on the individual cases. If that case is admitted into the Court of Appeal, because effectively permission has to be given from judges for that to happen, it could be maybe months before the Court of Appeal hears that. And then you've got the possibility of the case getting into the Supreme Court if there's a really important point of law which still needs thrashing out. That, well, I don't know, but it could take us into the summer or maybe the autumn of next year. So you can see that this could be a very, very long process. And while that's going on, it seems that things are in limbo. But in effectively legal terms at the moment, the government has definitely got the upper hand on the principle of making the Rwanda scheme work. And that's also politically important because the government wants to try and strike deals with other countries. And if it can strike deals with other countries on the basis of being told today it's got the green light, in theory, for Rwanda, well, who knows where this is going to lead in the year to come.
And at the moment, what are the circumstances around who they decide can be deported?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Basically, under the scheme, anybody who comes through a safe third country where the government believes they should have claimed asylum in that country could be allocated to this scheme. So the perfect example here are small boats, the dinghy migrants, those people who are risking their lives coming across the channel. In this case, there were the cohort of migrants who were allocated to this first aborted flight involved people who'd made quite long and lengthy journeys across Europe. From memory, I recall that one of the migrants had actually initially tried to ask Greece if they could stay there. I may be wrong if they actually got into the final case here in court. It's been rather complicated. But in essence, it's about those migrants seeking asylum who've made journeys across Europe to seek asylum in the UK. Now, what their supporters say is that international law, the Refugee Convention, is absolutely clear that they have the right to do that, because if they are effectively directly coming to the UK, even if they're kind of stopping off en route because they've got good reason to come to the UK, perhaps they have family here already, then that's a good reason to allow them to come to the UK and claim asylum. Under this scheme, however, the Home Secretary says, your case is one of the cases I'm going to send to Rwanda. We're not denying you the right to seek asylum. It's just you're going to have that right dealt with in Rwanda under this scheme, where we've paid the Rwandan government about 120 million, a little bit more by now, to manage those cases. And that's why it's so controversial, because Israel's tried something similar but then kind of aborted the policy after a year or so. So there are a lot of countries looking at the UK to see whether they can make this work.
OK, Dominic Cassiani, thanks for taking us through that at the High Court there. Thank you.